Hello and welcome to Reading the Gospels Together for Wednesday, June 17th. And today we're in Jerusalem with Jesus. Now, surprisingly, given yesterday's excitement with Jesus clearing the temple of the merchants, he's nevertheless now teaching in the temple courts. This is an area on the southern end of the enormous platform of the Temple Mount, more or less where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is now located, but not in the actual temple itself. In the center of the Temple Mount, where the golden domed Muslim Shrine of the Rock now stands. Now, still nervous about the crowd and Jesus' influence over the people, the temple authorities approach Jesus again, trying a different tactic. "Who gave you the authority to say and do these things?" they ask, such as doubtless clearing out the merchants and the money changers. Rather than simply answer God, which they doubtless expected and were ready for with an argument, Jesus answers their question with a question. He says, "I will also ask you a question. Tell me, John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin?" Now, I'm surprised that they didn't say, "Well, we asked you first." But instead it says they discussed it among themselves and said, "If we say from heaven, he will ask, 'Why didn't you believe John?' But if we say of human origin, all the people will stone us because they're persuaded that John was a prophet." So they answered, "We don't know where it came from." Jesus said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." Now, there's a couple of things going on under the surface of all this. Like Jesus, John was preaching religious and societal reform, instituting baptism as a sign of new life, quite separate from what was going on at the temple, outside the realm of their control. He was a rival to the temple system, in a way. Now, secondly, John had endorsed Jesus, even encouraging his own followers to be following Jesus. By saying John's authority came from heaven, the temple authorities would then be faced with explaining John's support of Jesus. But if they said that John was just a crackpot, there would be a riot. John had been enormously popular, still was popular, drawing crowds from all over the country. And he was a harsh critic of the hated Herod, who used the temple priests as a tool. And John, because he was by now dead, having been killed by Herod, he had even a greater status in the eyes of the people, a martyr. So it was a no-win situation for the authorities who claimed the fifth. "We don't know," tantamount to saying, "We refuse to answer on the grounds that it may incriminate us." And so Jesus says, "Well, neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." I'm sure you could have heard the authorities gnashing their teeth from a distance. But Jesus doesn't let up on them. He immediately turns to the crowd and tells them a parable in which the temple authorities and religious leaders are the bad guys, accusing them of using the temple and the Jewish faith for their own profit. Jesus predicts their imminent end, which with the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD would indeed come to pass. A lot more about that in the next chapter. Since 70 AD, since that time, there has been no temple, no sacrifices, no established priestly order. It's all gone. Jewish worship to this day happens not in a temple, but in synagogues and homes, under the direction not of priests, but of rabbis. More or less a continuation of the Pharisaic order rather than the priestly orders. They're not done yet. That was strike one. Trying still another angle, the authorities, Luke tells us, send spies to see if they can trip Jesus up and make him Pilate's problem. They try the old, "Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" thing, and Jesus answered, "Yes, you should be good citizens and pay your taxes to the evil and hated Rome." No, he doesn't say that. If he did, he'd lose the support of the people. But if Jesus says, "No, keep your money, you shouldn't support Rome's bloodthirsty rule," then Jesus would be marched off to the execution ground on the charge of sedition. Well, we've covered this story before. It's familiar. In essence, Jesus asks for a coin, sees a picture of the emperor on it, and says, "You better give it back to him and give to God what is God's." Well, strike two. Now, having failed to discredit him and having failed to implicate him to Pilate, they now try to ridicule Jesus. They use the Sadducees as their tool. The Sadducees were another powerful religious party. They followed only the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and they rejected any idea of the resurrection of the dead, which isn't found in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, but is indeed a central part of Jesus' teaching. If the resurrection is going to happen, they say, What about a woman who's been married 7 times, having no children? Who's her husband in heaven? Perhaps they had Elizabeth Taylor in mind. I don't know if she was around by then or not. Jesus' answer gives us plenty to think about. He says, the people of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of taking part in the age to come and in the resurrection from the dead will neither marry nor be given in marriage, and they can no longer die, for they're like the angels. They're God's children since they are children of the resurrection. Now, if that baffled you, it didn't baffle the Sadducees. Because in Jewish thought, the purpose of marriage was to have children, to procreate. The woman in the example of the Sadducees had been married 7 times in an unsuccessful attempt to bear a child. Who will be responsible for her having a child in heaven? But in heaven, since death is no longer, nor is there need for procreation, well, the woman will not need a child, for we all become children of the resurrection, says Jesus. Now again, this answer may seem a bit baffling to us, but it so impressed the Sadducees that they complimented Jesus. Well done, teacher, they said. So strike 3, and they're out. And Luke tells us that no one dared ask Jesus any more questions. They weren't going to beat him that way. Now this chapter on the conflict between Jesus and the religious authorities ends with a warning Jesus gives regarding the clergy. A warning, you can be sure, which rings loudly in my ears. Beware the teachers of the law, says Jesus. They like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, meaning they swindle the old folks, and for a show they make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. May God make my motives pure and keep me from this deadly snare. Tomorrow we'll continue with Jesus in the temple with both a familiar and humbling example, and we'll return to the passages that we looked at in Matthew and Mark regarding the destruction of the temple and signs of the end. Hang on till then, and we'll see you tomorrow. But just before I go, a funny story. I was doing a Bible study on either Matthew, Mark, or Luke, I can't remember which one. And this example of the Sadducees came up saying, well, what about this woman who's married 7 times? Who's she going to be married to in heaven? And Jesus effectively said, well, there's no marriage in heaven. At the exact time that I said this, on one side of the room, there was a dear sweet lady who said, oh no, oh dear, I'll miss my husband. On the other side, a dear sweet lady said, oh, thank God. I'll leave that one for you to figure out. God bless you, and we will see you tomorrow.